Okay, so today we are starting my favorite subject of all, sales. So how many people on the course have got sort of a background in sales or feel comfortable with sales on the call? Okay, 1, 2, great. Okay, so we've got 2. So sales, I have been in sales for all of my career, and I take thumbs down from Sheree. And I take enormous pride in the fact that I find sales fascinating, and it is most certainly one of the most enjoyable pieces of my job. Probably not necessarily because I like the sales process, but I'm very clear that if you can't sell what you've built, then you know, there really isn't a lot of point of building it in the first place. So I feel that there's a lot of self satisfaction in basically being able to bring a sale over the line. I'm a bit of an old schooler when it comes to, you know, if you've built something and you can't sell it, then it's a hobby. It's not a real business. So you're going to get a lot of that in this particular call. So what we are going over today is some sales process basics. We're looking at sorry, Bazak,
I'm listening to something here. I don't have earphones.
You don't have earphones. Could you just put yourself on mute? There you go. I put you on mute. There we go. I think I put you on mute. Fantastic. Okay, so what we're going to be going on today is sales process basics, then lead generation, because obviously you can't do sales if you don't have leads coming in. And then qualification, and then sales pipeline management. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the attitude that you need to have in sales in order to maximize the chances of you getting sales over the line. For those people on the call that have got sales experience, please do feel free to jump in at any point. I think the more the merrier, especially if you're not, you know, any perspective is useful. So first of all, the most important thing to sort of understand is that sales doesn't happen in a business-to-business sense, and even in most senses, doesn't necessarily happen, you know, all at once. What you have to have is you have to have a lot of people coming in the top of the funnel who will say, yes, I'm interested in your products and services. Then you take them through a qualification process, asking them questions, making sure that what they're looking for, you know, your organization can match those needs. And then finally, hopefully a sales pop puts out the other end. So that's what we basically look at when we talk about a sales funnel. And for those people that aren't used to sales, this is a really good process and way to think about whether you're spending the right amount of time in the sales funnel in the right place. Okay, so the whole point of the sales funnel is you should have lots of people going into it, and then you should be slowly massaging those people out of your funnel to ensure the right people are going to be buying with joy and happiness when they come out at the end of the funnel. Okay, so we're going to be looking a little bit at the sales funnel and how you create it. Obviously, if you have a CRM, you know, a platform to manage sales, then obviously the sales funnel is, you know, pre-managed with you with the different, you know, process layers. But to be honest with you, all of us on this call could probably, you know, manage our sales, you know, with an Excel spreadsheet. So basically what the sales funnel allows you to do is systematically have a way of thinking to move those individuals from the top of the funnel through to the bottom of the funnel. And why you want to have a systematic process, right, rather than just trying to close them. So people that are new to sales, or people that are maybe not quite as sophisticated, just assume that as soon as somebody walks in the door, they're going to, you know, they're in buying mode. And what the sales process basically allows us to do is systematically think about the questions that we're going to need to ask and the information we're going to need to get back from that potential buyer in order to understand whether they're ready to buy or not. These key kind of stages are, first of all, awareness. So have you got them into the funnel? So this is really where there's a handoff between marketing and then, when we start moving into sales. So sales kind of takes over in the interest area. Yeah. Are you interested in what, we've got, and then you can start talking about things like, values and, what they're looking for, what brought them to, your website or whatever it might be. And then we go through the consideration where we are basically asking them nice open questions to figure out, what they're interested in, what their kind of passions are, and, what they're trying to achieve. Then we can basically weigh up whether they are serious or not, and that's intent. And then if they are serious, we can put both of those things together and they can move on to the purchase stage. Now, a lot of people who are new to sales think that the more people you have in your sales process, the better. Okay. Certainly, the more people you have going into the top of the funnel, absolutely the better. But keeping people in your funnel, right, is not a good idea. Okay. Because what it gives you an inflated idea of the people that are actually going to buy when they're clearly not going to. And it also makes you have a kind of sense of kind of confidence that you've got enough that is going to drop out the other end. Okay. So what you want to be thinking at when you start looking at your sales process is, how do I get people out of the sales process in each stage as soon as possible? Okay. You want to qualify them out. Okay. So the process of managing a good, sales bucket is not to keep them in there, is to basically get them out. Because the quicker you get them out, the more realistic your sales process is. So we've probably all worked in companies where, you think you've got loads of opportunity, but actually nothing ever filters through to the bottom. It never closes. And we're going to be looking at, not on this sales element, but we're going to be looking at, what questions and stuff that we can ask throughout the sales pipeline in the next coming days, in order to basically really put not the screws on to get them to buy, but the screws on to ask them whether they are actually going to buy or they're not, or they still deserve to be in your pipeline. Okay. You've got to look at your sales process as, this is the energy that you've got to spend. And so what you don't want is, you don't want people in that sales process that are not likely to drop out the other end. So don't think of it as, I want to keep them in there. Think of it as, I want to get them out of there so that I can focus on putting more in the top and qualifying them out. Okay. So it's a slightly different way. And what you will find is that, a lot of people that haven't been in sales, for a long time, or junior sales managers, will look at people's pipeline and go, well, the more people in it and the more stuff that's happening, the more successful that salesperson is. But then unfortunately, nothing will drop out the other end. And so it's not about the size of your pipeline in terms of number of opportunities. It's how well qualified they are in each stage of that process. Okay. And what we're going to go on to talk about is, for you and your business, what questions and what information you need at each stage. Okay. To know whether they are fit for purpose or they're not. And again, a lot of that builds on the work that we did in marketing in terms of what your business stands for, and of course your kind of 4 Ps. So one of the things as well with the sales process is that, and I'm sure those people who've worked in sales can recognize this, is there's parts of the sales process doesn't move with the same velocity, but you should try and make it move with consistent velocity at each stage. Okay. So if you've got a load of people that have been sitting in the bottom, i.e. just about to drop, you've been through legals and contracts or whatever it might be, but they're not buying, then basically you need to go further up the sales process and again bring them down in terms of qualification. And we'll go on to talk a little bit more about how that is. But you should have a nice smooth velocity. Now, it's really difficult to deliver that, but hopefully if we think of our sales funnel, our sales process in the right way, we can get closer to that. So really, in order, this kind of science behind sales, is not pushing people, and is not certainly not like, you know, trying to basically get people to buy before they're ready. Okay, that just annoys everybody. It's uncomfortable for the salesperson, and it's definitely uncomfortable for the buyer. Okay, so we are not about trying to push people into a close before they're ready. That is just, you know, a silly way of basically, you know, creating value, creating relationships, and ultimately you're never going to get an advocate, even if you do get a customer. So the whole process of sales is about understanding where the buyer is in that sales process and ensuring they have the information, they've been able to ask the right questions at that time in order to move them gently and willingly and passionately and enthusiastically onto the next stage of the process. Okay, so there should never be a point in the sales process that the customer feels like they are being pushed or cajoled or forced to do something they do not want to do. Okay, and what happens when somebody feels like that is they're being asked to make a decision when they don't have enough information, you haven't got a sufficient relationship with them, you know, they don't feel that you've understand their needs, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the whole point of process automation is looking at the stages of the funnel. Okay, so this is what we do. We spend time scientifically looking at what the buyer needs in each of these stages in order to optimize the process. So if we are not getting the sales that we want, okay, the first piece of work we need to do is the golden why, look at our marketing, look at our 4 Ps. But then when we get people into the sales process, we need to be understanding what information they need at what point during the sales process to make them comfortable to slide on down that beautiful funnel that you've created and happily and enthusiastically sign your purchase order with joy and exhilaration in their heart, right? So here, what we're doing is we're picking apart what happens in each stage of the process. So what we want to do is we want to define specific activities for each part of the sales process. Okay, so what happens here, right? What happens here, what happens here, and what happens in the close. So what we're looking to do is, as a team, think about the conversations that we've had with our customers previously and work out what is going on in each of those pipeline stages, not only from your point of view, as in your organization, but also what questions, what queries, what kind of things are, you know, coming up in terms of the buyer in order to basically close out that period in the pipeline. So ideally what you want to do is you want to have a set of documentations that allows you to move through that stage as quick as possible. Okay, so what you're doing is you're not necessarily reliant on, and this is where a CRM can come into you know, play, but also just documentation. So, you know, fact sheets on certain things, case studies on certain things, return on investment in certain things, an understanding of how often you know, the client wants to be communicated with. If you need to bring in other departments, so we will talk further in the course about the buying decision-making unit, because if you're selling into a large B2B company, I mean, even if you're selling into a restaurant, there might not be one person you need to talk to, there might be multiple pieces of people we'll talk to. So at what stage in the process do you have to get other people involved in order to ultimately get them convinced and happy so that you can move them through the process? And really try the just basic things you can do, like try and set up automated reminders for the next step. Okay, the worst thing is sales, you need to manage the sales process. So you, as the salesperson managing the sales process, every single time you leave a call, you need to agree the next action. Okay, and that's on you, not on them. Don't leave them with the action, leave you with the action to say, and I will follow up next week in order to get your feedback. Don't say, you know, can we agree that you're going to call me back next week? That is not the way you manage a sales process. You are in charge of managing the next, you know, active thing that's going to happen in that sales process. Okay, not in a aggressive way, just in a, I'm here to help you get through this funnel. You might get through it, or you might not. You might decide that you know, you don't want to buy. But at the end of the day, I'm here to ensure that every touch point adds value to that process, and you know, if it works out for both of us, you'll plop out the other end, right? But it's not forcing, it's just you are in charge of managing that process. The other thing is that it's really important is to know who you're selling to. Okay, so in all organizations, and we will go through this in another presentation, you have a variety of different things that people are thinking about. Okay, and we call that the buying decision making unit. So they're thinking about it from an economic point of view. Does it make sense? Like, does it meet my budget? They're thinking of it from a kind of a user point of view. So, you know, do I like the smell? Does it work for me? Does it, you know, is it fit for purpose? They're thinking from a technical point of view, like, you know, is it good quality? Does it, you know, map onto the existing infrastructure we've already got? And then there's also a part of them that we call kind of the advocacy buyer. And the advocacy buyer is very much in and around, do I actually like these people? Do we share similar values? So even if you're selling in a business consumer facing way or a B2B way, these are the types of emotions and things that people are going to be thinking about when you move through the sales process. So you need to make sure that you've hit on all of them. There's no particular order, but it's always a good idea to have an advocate before you start taking them through the more kind of detail elements of your sales process. So the other thing that you can do, and again, this only comes with time, is understanding why people are dropping out of the sales process, and then basically coming up with not necessarily objections, but just an understanding. Am I understanding at the moment that we haven't got enough compliance functionality for your, you know, for what you're looking for? Yes, that's right. Okay, fine. So we could put that into, we can try and find ways, workarounds around that. But the bottom line is we are still trying to understand what has caused that person to drop out of the pipeline, and either patch it with improvements in our 4Ps, or if we are unable to do that, then, you know, they drop out of the sales pipeline. And this is also where sales is kind of like at the forefront. And maybe I would say this because I'm a salesperson, but not listening to your salespeople in terms of what's going on in the market when people aren't converting is literally the kiss of death, because you will carry on producing features that the market doesn't buy. And, you know, it's happened to me a lot in my career where basically we've got a bloated product, and there are elements that are just not being bought for one reason or the other. And of course, that's wasted resource. Now, it's different if you've got an owner manager, like, you know, I've always been kind of an owner manager and been very involved in sales. But you really do need to listen to your customer, because that's really where you find out whether those 5 forces and your defense mode of the 4Ps is basically, you know, able to hold that off. So the people that are communicating are the salespeople. They're the newest in the market. They are literally the first people that are saying, hey, look, this is how I'm utilizing my 4Ps, and I'm going to battle into the 5 forces. And they will be able to tell you whether you are competing or not, and not listening to, you know, them and the quote unquote voice of the customer is a surefire way of basically year on year the company, you know, not growing in line with, you know, expectations. So the role of the salesperson is really critical, you know, in this. And also just feeding back, the salesperson should be feeding back what they are getting from the market as well, obviously, in order to pivot and change. Now, obviously, one data point from a salesperson is not necessarily enough for you to start changing your 4Ps, but certainly once you get the same feedback again and again and again, you know that you've got to make amends to the 4Ps in order to stop the 5 forces from, you know, basically swamping your golden circle and taking away your fortress. So it's really kind of that simple. Okay, then we go on to lead generation strategies. Now, this is really, really important from a salesperson's point of view. So if you're a salesperson, okay, you want to know that when you land in your role, you're going to get a lot of leads, okay? Most salespeople feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable having to do everything from lead generation all the way over to close, which means that you, as an owner-operator, if you are going to get a salesperson in, you need to either put them in a lead generation role where they're basically sitting in between marketing, and they might be smashing the phone, or they might be doing whatever they might do, outbound emails or whatever. But as a salesperson, you're either doing lead generation or you're doing, you know, or you're doing closing. It's very, very difficult to have your eyes on both of those prizes at the same time. So if you are a good salesperson, a senior salesperson, you would never join an organization that doesn't give you a really good understanding of how many leads that particular organization is getting in, okay? Because what that salesperson is responsible for is converting. So if there's not enough leads coming in, then basically they're bored, and not only are they bored, but basically it's demoralizing. But then the other problem is that they'll keep things in their sales funnel for longer to make it look like they're busy, even though they're not busy. Okay. So in terms of lead generation strategies, the idea there's good lead generation strategies that are all leads, and there's bad leads. Okay. Good leads are the ones that basically come in knowing what you do. So they know your 4 Ps. They know, in the example of growth engineering, that, you know, we're experts in gamification. They know that we've got clients like L'Oreal and HP. They know that, you know, as a learning management system, we've been around for a long time and we've got a great mobile first product. So they already know all of that. Okay. So my job when that lead comes in, or Simon's job, or Matt's job, or whoever's doing the sales for growth engineering, is to ensure that what they're looking for doesn't fit the high level, it fits the minutiae. So we're going to be looking at how our platform meets their specific purchasing criteria. But if I have people coming in to the sales funnel who are, let's say, I'm a school in Ghana, I'm a an NGO, you know, that's basically selling to 100 people. This is no good for me. This is no good for me. I can't sell to them, and they're not well qualified leads. Okay. So when you look at your lead generation strategy, you need to ensure that they are as qualified as possible if you want to get the most out of your salesperson, because your salesperson is about finding that hand in glove, right? They are about basically doing the best deal possible for the buying organization and your organization. They're about getting that deal as big as it can be and as strong as it can be, but they can't do that if they're being asked to sell an enterprise platform into a small school that, you know, in Ghana. That's just not going to work, right? So the lead generation strategy, you need to be realistic. You are not ready for a salesperson in your organization if you are not creating good quality leads. That it's really clear when that lead comes into the pipeline that it understands your position in the market, it understands the 4 Ps, right? And you can do a lot through automation to basically ensure that they do know what they're buying. So the key to all of this is making sure that, you know, you really do understand your ideal customer, right? The salesperson should not be in front of anybody that isn't in an ideal way your ideal customer. Okay, if you want a happy salesperson and a salesperson that's basically going to be converting to the max. Okay. So the kind of questions that a salesperson would ask at the beginning of the sales process is literally trying to qualify them out. So have you got a budget? Are you in a role that basically will allow you to make a decision over this purchase? You know, what's your time scales? It's these types of things. Okay. But you really do need to know, and it's always difficult when you first start, you know, a business to necessarily know what those qualification questions are. But the salesperson will innately understand the ideal customer very, very quickly. They'll start asking questions and trying to work out whether the products and the 4 Ps that you have basically created to protect, you know, against the 5 forces is a match. Okay, that's what the salesperson is doing. So hopefully by now, we're now sort of 5 or 6 slides into it, you understand that there's no snake oil salesman. There's no salesperson that's basically trying to, by some magic, trying to convince people to buy stuff they don't want. That is not the game we're in at all, right? If we want sustainable business based on high value, solid growth, the salesperson is basically the bastion between ensuring that you are basically delivering out your 4 Ps against the 5 forces market. So it's all about asking questions, qualifying, and ensuring that, you know, that ideal customer is the one that falls at the bottom of your pipeline. Because if you have ideal customers that fall in the bottom of the pipeline, what do you get? You get beautiful advocacy. You get passionate customers. You get customers that are all about your growth. They are invested in your growth. Okay. And that is the job of a salesperson. Okay. Aligning interests to create passionate advocacy. It is nothing to do with snake oil salesmen and trying to get people to do things that they don't want to do. Okay, so if there's one thing that you take away from this, please take away the fact, and I, you know, it's horrible to me that people are like, oh, you know, salespeople just force you to do things you don't want. That is just not true at all. That is absolutely, you know, just not the case. The whole point of being in sales is matching requirements to your 4 Ps. So what you want to be doing, what the salesperson is doing here is basically fully understanding what type of buyer that they're talking to. So are they talking to an advocate? Are they talking to a budget holder? Are they talking to a technical person? Are they talking to somebody who is, you know, so first of all, have you got the entire scope of people you need to be selling to? Identifying what their pain points are, so what's worked for them before and what needs to work for them in the future, and then basically ensuring that you are managing that person's navigation through the pipeline to ensure that you are helping them with any internal discussions they've had to. Do we need to take this through finance? Do we need to talk to your tech team? Do we need to whatever it might be, in order to make that person's process of going through your pipeline as enjoyable and, you know, as good as possible? Because the more enjoyable it is, the more likely they are to be advocates for you. Right, so basically the qualification framework you need to start off with in a B2B sales is, can they actually afford your solution? Okay, now what you will find with salespeople that haven't been in this sales role for very long is that they really struggle with the tough questions. And they're like, oh, I don't want to, if I ask, have you got the budget for this? That might put them off, or it might put them on the back foot. But that's just simply not the case. So basically what research has shown is, if salespeople are able to ask tougher questions in a way that promotes feedback, so not a yes or a no, so not closed questions, nice broad open questions, what that does is develop trust, because the buyer knows that they are in safe hands. They're in, you know, salesperson hands, and that salesperson understands the questions that need to be asked so that nobody wastes their time. Okay, so a really basic but good lead qualification framework is the BANT framework. So this is, you know, is this actually within your gift to spend the money? I mean, can you actually afford it? You don't need to ask it in that way, but you can sort of skirt around the outside to get an idea whether, you know, are you actually in the game of, you know, £250,000 spend, or are you actually in the game of a 50? And you can be very direct. You know, you can ask the question, you know, what is your actual budget? Then the next thing that we need to talk about is authority. Do they actually have the authority to buy? And there are lots and lots of people that come into your funnel that are researching. They're just researching. So they don't have the authority to buy. And the quicker you know that, the quicker you can get them out the funnel. So have I got all of this information that I can deliver over to you, so that basically you can go away and research on yourself? You don't need to take my time in doing that. Then have they got a need, and is that need aligned with your need? Okay, so for example, if somebody comes to us in terms of, you know, I don't know, let's say we're talking about Zavmo, highly interactive, you know, graphics content. They want, you know, a cartoon type experience for learning. Well, they're not going to get that from Zavmo, because Zavmo is conversational learning. Or in the case of, you know, growth engineering, are they looking for a gamified solution? If they're not, then, you know, it's just not a good fit. So, you know, in terms of genuine problems, you really need to make sure that your USP, you know, that golden orb of yours, fits perfectly with the values of the client. And then you've got to ask about timeline. If you don't ask about timeline, then basically they're just going to sit in your funnel for goodness knows how long. And in large enterprise sales, this is one of the most frustrating things, that basically, because you haven't found a pain point for them to latch onto, or a critical event to latch onto, there's nothing to basically drag them over the line on close. So you can do creative things to create that, you know, time impediment. And you've probably seen it a lot. You know, we're coming to the end of the quarter, I need to close, I can give you 10% off. Or, I mean, that's a very basic and quite ugly you know, closing technique, but you know, there are other ones. You know, if you do this, we can ensure that, you know, the features that you want included are in next quarter's roadmap or whatever. So you do need to have a timeline. So you need to constantly go back, and if they don't give you a timeline, or they don't have any idea, right, you know, we're having the next budget cycle and that's going to be in 3 months or 6 months, then you've got a problem. Yeah, they shouldn't really be in the pipeline, or they're stuck at a certain place in the pipeline until they do have a budget. And all of these things, and a timeline, and all of these things you should put some scoring to. And this is really where the pipeline gets really, really horrible. Because actually, when you start looking at it from just a basic BANT methodology, you'll often find 9 times out of 10 that you have less in your pipeline than you'd hoped. And particularly if you've got a set of targets, this is also where it comes really, really scary. And you're like, right, we need to get more in the top of the pipeline. So the other thing is that you're going to be asked to do as a salesperson is get people through the sales pipeline as soon as possible, right? You do not want people staying in the pipeline for a long period of time, okay? So the only way you are going to get that pipeline moving faster, okay? And let's be clear, right? The quicker the pipeline moves, the more money you're making. That's really that simple, right? The salespeople are going out, they're qualifying, they're asking a load of questions, they're ensuring that there's a good fit. But the faster they can do that with processes that you can put in and around them, fact sheets, case studies, return on investment stuff, the quicker those salespeople are going to be able to get that those sales through the pipeline. And the only way to do that is forensic science, is to go back and say, right, okay, we've now sold to 50 people, right? What happened through that pipeline and what made them drop and what made them drop out, okay? The other thing that you can do is you can create, you know, urgency through time-bound offers. And this you just need to be really creative about. If possible, don't give price discounts, okay? You can give price discounts for repeat purchasing, but don't give price discounts for just on its own. That is a bad thing to do, because it cheapens your overall value. So just be a little bit careful of discounting price. You don't want to. Now, in some cultures, you have to know going into the negotiation that you're going to have to discount the price. But again, that should be part of taking them through the sales process. So you know you're going to have to discount the price, let's say 4 times in order to close the deal, and that price negotiation is just part of what happens. And again, that is about forensically looking at what's happened in those clients or clients like those before, and making sure that that is part of your mapped sales process. Always follow up. It is the salesperson's responsibility to be the secretary of the sales process. Okay, it is your responsibility to never leave a meeting unless you've got another meeting booked, but it is also your responsibility to write the meeting notes, right? So that they can just go straight onto their email and work out why they should be talking to you rather over than their competitors, because they've got everything on their email or they've got everything on their whatever message app. But the sales process person is the secretary of the sales process. So always you are in control, and always you are the person that is responsible for following up. The other thing that the salesperson should be doing when they're looking at the sales process is always looking for ways to upsell and cross-sell. Okay, ultimately what we're looking for here is to maximize profitability, and if you know the secondary is maximize overall deal size. Okay, so we really want to be looking at ways we can upsell and cross-sell, and we want to be looking at ways we can upsell and cross-sell, not necessarily immediately, but looking at what that looks like in the future. So yes, I've just sold you a learning management system, but I haven't sold you the mobile version. I haven't sold you Zavmo. I haven't sold you. Let me tell you about those products. You know, let me tell you about, you know, how they may or may not map to problems you've got. If it's problems you've got, fantastic, but they've only got 50K and they need to have a lot more than that. At least you know you can go back in for another nibble in 6 months' time, right? So make sure that you have a view of upselling, cross-selling, different products and services that you do, and adding value like that. And the other thing is you may find that, you know, different customers require different kind of bundles. So we know, for example, in growth engineering, that retailers are much more likely to go down the mobile route, you know, whereas office-based, you know, they'll go for the full suite. So you want to basically, the salesperson wants to make sure that they're mapping and their knowledge of what's happened prior to that, and putting together, you know, from marketing assets, case studies that are relevant to that actual client. And mostly what we want to do is make sure that we're creating value through matching what the seller, the buyer wants and what you've got. Okay, so as soon as you start selling or trying to sell stuff that the buyer doesn't want, you basically lower your standing in their eyes. Okay, this is why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Okay, so a good salesperson is constantly trying to understand what pain and what pressure points, what goals, aspirations the buyer has, so that we can create value through the sales process, so that the experience is as good as it possibly can be. And so to do that, we ask questions, and then we listen. We shut up and we just listen. Yeah. So there's no such thing as a good salesperson that talks a lot. Just doesn't exist, right? Just doesn't exist. So what we want to be doing is, if you're managing a salesperson, these are the common kind of sales activity metrics that you want to be looking at. First of all is number of new leads. If you're not getting a good number of new leads and they're not well qualified, then immediately you're going to have a problem going through your pipeline. Ultimately the growth of the organization will slow down or stop or retract. So the number of new leads is literally a golden number. It has been a golden number for us at GE for forever and a day. Then you want, when we start getting into managing sales teams, you want to know that they're following up, and a lot of that can be automated, and but a lot of salespeople don't do it. It's really sloppy, really sloppy from what I've seen. Thank you very much for your time today. This is basically what we discussed. Follow up is really important. It should be done immediately. It should be done immediately after the call. Of course, never come off call unless you've got the next appointment. So you are responsible for basically scheduling those meetings and making sure they've got everything they need in run up to that meeting. The salesperson is also responsible for proposals, but not necessarily what's in that proposal. Okay, so proposals really should be generic. So they should be generic from the organization, and you should be using, because every time a salesperson spends time on creating a proposal, they are not spending time on what they should be doing, which is taking people through the sales process. So generic sales processes are the most important. And then of course you're looking at closing ratio. If your closing ratio is really bad, okay, if a salesperson's got to talk to 25 people and only get 1 sale, or a salesperson got to get 50 people and is only getting 1 sale, you've got a problem, either with the salesperson or the product market fit, right? If the salesperson is genuinely having 50 conversations and they're only able to basically close 1 sale, you have definitely got a problem with your 4 Ps and how that 4 Ps is resonating against the 5 forces, right? That is just, a fact on the ground. I mean, salespeople are not complete idiots. So if the salesperson is unable to convert, you have to look at the 4 Ps and you have to look at the 5 forces in order to understand why they're not, okay? Because really, all the salesperson is doing is gently taking this person through questioning and qualifying, but they're not magic. If your product is shit and it doesn't meet the market requirements, then the best salesperson in the world will not be able to turn, a pile of shit into a golden nugget. So just in terms of team development, and this is an area that we always should have done a lot more of in growth engineering, going through the sales pipeline and being absolutely rigorous on why things are falling out of the pipeline, why we are not able to move them forward, is a real opportunity for team development. And if you don't have a sales team, you've just got a load of people that are all in the same company. Let's say you're a company of 5 or a company of whatever. This is something that you can do together, sit down, right? Why did we lose that sale? Why didn't it go our way? What happened at what stage of the pipeline, and what is basically going on that we can't secure these sales? So don't think of it as something that it would be exclusively done by sales. As owner operators on this call, we should all be going through, like, why is it we're stuck at certain places in the pipeline? Why can't we move this on? And the other thing is lots of small businesses hate doing this to themselves. They hate having targets. They'll go, oh, let's not have targets. Oh, no, I don't want to, because we always fail anyway. So what's the point? You should maintain targets, right? All businesses that are in high growth mode and are very sales focused are A, they have a very strong sales culture, but B, you live and die by your sales targets. So if the organization is convinced that there's good product market fit, and obviously if you're VC backed, you're going to have the VC will most certainly have targets for you in place. If those targets are not being met, then you know, they'll obviously come to the salespeople first because they know that there is a good product market fit. And if you're failing on your sales targets, you will just get removed. So it's really, really important to have the discipline to have sales targets and, you know, be strong enough to basically ensure that, you know, when you don't hit your sales targets, that, you know, you at least discuss it. So common funnel challenges, when we look at basically what goes wrong, the biggest thing that goes wrong is you're not examining your sales funnel. You're just not looking at it, and you're just not being realistic. So basically it looks like everything's hunky-dory, but in fact, it's just not. Nothing is moving. So when you look at the stages of your pipeline, the people are not moving from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4 and then close. And so it just sits there. And so, you know, basically all that happens is you're just dragging cost through the whole business, because the sales cycle is going from 3 months all the way through to 9 months. You're just sitting there burning through cash, right? You've got your product people doing their thing. You've got your customer success people doing their thing. You've got people running around pretending to be busy in the hope that something is going to fall. And actually it just doesn't happen. The other thing is that if you do have long sales cycle and you have low conversion rates, you have to be looking at your 4 Ps. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if as an organization you are looking at your sales funnel, right, and you can see that you have qualified at each level, you understand the buyer's pain points, you understand the solution they're looking for, you understand the budget they have, you understand that you've got the right authority in the room. If it's not moving, that is nothing to do with the salesperson. That is to do with the organization. That's to do with your 4 Ps, and that's what's happening in terms of the 5 forces, right? So, you know, there's no point hoping that you're going to get a majestic salesperson to fix something that is fundamentally not working if you're looking at your sales funnel, and you can, you know, be assured that that sales funnel is being maximized, you know, in terms of the stages and the qualification through those stages. So, you know, in response to, and this is why when you are forensically analyzing your broken funnel, you really, really should be looking at that as a management team, right? You should take sales all the way up to the top of the organization, and you should be like, why is this not working? Why are we not converting? Because the reality is, if you can assure yourself that you are managing the sales funnel correctly, right, then the only other thing you've got is you've got to look at the 4 Ps, you know, price, promotion, place, you know, and product. In terms of tools and technologies, you know, we have used tools and technologies, you know, in the past, and will, you know, certainly continue to use them. CRM systems are really, really useful for ensuring that you are constantly keeping in contact with, you know, people that may not be in the sales funnel, but, you know, you might be able to upsell and cross-sell to them. So certainly, you know, having a CRM, even if you're very small, is a good idea. And these are practically free. There are loads of them, and anybody on the call, feel free to put it in the chat. But having a CRM is a really, really good idea. You absolutely should not go for Salesforce or anything like that. It's far too overcomplicated. But, you know, in not using one, an Excel spreadsheet is fine, you know, because at the end of the day, you probably don't have that many huge amount of opportunities, you know, anyway. However, sales enablement tools, I would say, are an absolute must, and sales enablement tools will definitely be part of automation. Okay, so as a salesperson, you are the secretary of the process. You are responsible for managing and making sure that meetings are set and all of those kind of good stuff. And so the more enablement tools you can use to help you get through that process, the better it will be. So do use, you know, automation for proposals. You really shouldn't be doing customized proposals. It's a total waste of your time. You should be using, you know, meeting scheduling tools. You should be, you know, using open rate, so tracking who's opening your emails. If your prospect is not opening your emails, then clearly they're not really that interested, and that is obviously a red flag. You want to go in and understand, you know, why that might be. And anything that you can do to automate, and again, we're going to talk about that in further courses, is a really good idea, because, you know, you do want volume as well as quality. So you want quality and quantity. The next thing is I want you always to think of, you know, anything that we're doing as part of the organizational process. So we spent the first 2 weeks talking about, you know, marketing. Now we're talking about sales. What happens after sales is customer success, okay? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is create customer advocacy, right? Customer advocacy allows us to drive the cost of acquiring customers down, okay? And because we're a small organization, we are small organizations, we are not, you know, vertically, you know, closed box, right? We all work together. So marketing need to know that they're handing off to lead generation are handing off to sales, and sales are handing off to customer success. And in these customer success handoffs, you need to have really close alignment between the sales and what is going to happen next. If that trust is broken, okay, so that salesperson has spent the last, let's say, 9 months building up a relationship with those people, they hand it off to the customer success team. The customer success team are not adequately upskilled as to what is going on in that sales process. The trust is broken, and you're not going to get a passionate advocate. That's it. It's just broken. So you all of the goodwill that you had, basically, you know, you're going to stop. And it's all going to be like, well, what's going on? You told me this, you told me that, da 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 da. So yeah, you just need to be really, really careful when you are handing over from sales, particularly if that salesperson has got, you know, a reputation and a relationship with the client which is really strong. So just think about where this is going next, because holistically what we want is that customer advocacy, okay, to drive the cost of customer acquisition way down. And we want obviously our salespeople to start, sorry, our customers to be pushing forward advocacy and, you know, leads to go back into the top of our sales funnel. So the only way to improve in sales, okay, is basically regular reviews. So you want to be doing monthly pipeline analysis to understand where you are, and you really want to get into the guts of it. So what did this buyer say that basically made them fall out of the pipeline? And you want to be reviewing your pipeline in terms of each stage, right? So that you can really, really begin to understand what is going on and why people are falling out of the pipeline. And the other thing is it's really great if you are in a position where, you know, the organization is growing, you need a sales playbook. And these sales playbooks just allow new salespeople coming into your orbit to understand your golden why, to understand, you know, your perfect, you know, the perfect client that they're looking for, you know, understand your 4 Ps as described as a salesperson, understand, you know, the market that they're, you know, moving, that they're selling into, the common pain points in this market. All of that you want to have in your sales playbook, so people can just pick it up and, you know, understand what's going on. So just some observations before we close, because I think when people talk about sales and they talk about having, you know, a business, often they are talking about the same things. It's just that they don't really realize. Okay, so if you have a business and you want that business to grow, whether you like to call yourselves a salesperson or not, the reality is that if you're not basically taking interest in this subject area, if you're just you know, casting it aside, going, oh no, salespeople are just terrible, awful people, you're never going to grow your business, right? You need to have an interest in what is going on in sales, because those are the people at the front end of what is going on between you and your how you created your 4 Ps and how those 4 Ps are defending against the 5 forces. So just a couple of things. If you see a salesperson, right, and a salesperson is, you know, happy and full of energy, it's important, because you're not actually going to win the war. You're going into battle every single day. So it's not to be derisory if a salesperson has got a high energy attitude, because at the end of the day, if you're waging war every single day, you're going to need to have that kind of attitude to maintain a sense of discipline. Now, that doesn't mean to say every single salesperson that's going into battle has to have a happy-go-lucky attitude, but you need to have a little bit of respect for the fact that they are going to war every single day and they are not getting the outcome that the organization has placed the burden on them of getting. So it is important that, you know, there is energy in the sales department, and, you know, that energy is respected, and, you know, people talk to salespeople about why things aren't working in a positive way that can basically ensure, you know, that energy is maximized, because it's not easy. We also need to have a growth mindset. Okay, so if it's not working for salespeople, we need to be feeding them information about the industry, about, you know, what's going on, in order to basically get them to continually learn. Okay, so the more they can learn, the more likely they are to be able to come back to you and to either say, hey, I need more, you know, collateral from marketing. I need the product to be looking and shaping like this. I need some changes in X, Y, Z. But, you know, they need to have that proactive growth mindset where they're understanding the market to the absolute max in order to ensure they get that product market fit. The other thing is from a personal point of view, if you are that person doing the sales, it's really, really important that you never ever look at a sale you don't get as failure, right? It's not. It's just a numbers game, and it is about basically ensuring that those people that are in the funnel, you get rid of them as soon as possible. So if you start looking at your funnel as, oh my God, not as in I lost the sale, but as in I qualified that person out, it will allow you grace to basically not be disappointed. But you cannot have emotion when it comes to sales. Okay, it is just a process, and you are the expert that is guiding that person through the sales process. Okay, so really, really do think about this resilient assistance. It is not, no emotion should be tied to kicking people out of the sales process. Again, the growth mindset, but you know, this is a massive part of really successful teams, that they are constantly looking at adding value to their buyers, right? So they need to be the smartest people in your organization in terms of upskilling and cross skilling. They need to have as much information as they possibly can about trends that are emerging, because the smarter your salespeople are and the better growth mindset they have, the more likely they are to be able to say in advance, hey, look, this is what I'm hearing, and this is what we should be pivoting in terms of, you know, the 4 Ps. So that growth mindset is absolutely critical. So, you know, just keep on making sure that if you are that person for sales, you are constantly looking for anything that's going on in the market, anything that's going on in your competitors, so that you always, you know, can basically get those people through the funnel in a more efficient way. The next thing is that going back to the kind of 2 ears, 1 mouth thing, a really good salesperson does not talk a lot. Just doesn't. A really good salesperson just listens, and they listen to their customer because they love their customer. Okay, so the only thing that matters to the salesperson is to basically ensure that that person is happy, right? That's all they want to do. They basically just want to make sure that they understand what motivates and drives that customer in order to make that customer more successful. So you should, in lots of ways, know more about your customer, or you can never know, you know, you can never know, you know, more about, you know, what is going on in that customer's organization, what is going on in that customer's, you know, roles and responsibilities, what their goals are, what their targets are. You really need to know that customer, what motivates them, what drives them. That is basically the secret sauce, right? Is getting in to get that customer to talk to you about their worries, their concerns, so that you can work out if there is a good product market fit. Okay, it's not pushing your features, and especially if you look at the stats now, 92% of people basically talking to you will already know your products and service because they will have been on to your website. Okay, so the role of a salesperson isn't to educate them. There's no education, okay, on basically what your product does. It's out there on the internet. It's out there in reviews. It's out there. They know what they're doing. So you shouldn't be talking to them about, you know, necessarily what you do. You should be talking to them about what they need and how your organization can basically match those needs. And the more customer focused you are, the more customer centric you are as an organization, the more likely you are to basically be able to turn those customers into passionate advocates. The other thing is good salespeople are always going to be looking for solutions. Okay, and you can see this. The other side of that is you know, upselling and cross-selling. Okay, so we haven't got it this way, but what happens if we did this? We could maybe, you know, do some sort of joint venture. Maybe we do some sort of I don't know, pilot. Maybe we could do something. Why don't we start here and then, you know, see if we could get there? How about if we brought in this element and then we bolted on that element with this element? Would that get us closer to, and what are your thoughts on that, right? So a really good salesperson is not binary. It's not like, look at what I've got. Do you like it? Are you going to sell it to yourself? No, that's not the way it works, unfortunately. A good salesperson is always going, okay, so, you're L'Oreal, you're someone big. We want to work with you, right? So we might not have exactly what you want, but we might have something similar to what you want, right? A big hotel chain, in the case of Fora Gin, why don't we produce, a range just for you? Or, there's whatever, right? So don't think of it as necessarily, once you've really understood what your customer wants, there might be different solutions you can put to them, which are still within your gift. So a salesperson will always, try and be creative to the point of, the golden circle. This is why you should never move from the golden circle. So, it would be wrong if, anyone in growth engineering went back and said, we're experts in compliance, right? That would be the first way to basically, lose the trust. And so we can't be basically doing solution-oriented thinking in areas that we're just no good at. And it is not part of our golden why, but we should be able to do solution-oriented thinking in and around, the current 4 Ps we've got. And the final one is, you do need to congratulate the wins as well as, and the problem is the way the human psyche works is that we're always focused on the negative. So it's really, really easy for us to go, you know what, we haven't hit our targets. We haven't done what we needed to do. And then basically you just go down this kind of, slippery slope of basically not getting out there every day and basically just trying to create more sales. So, you need to be, you need to be tough, you need to be strong, and you need to have, a good dollop of self motivation to basically get up every day and make this happen. And I think, those couple of slides I've just shared are not necessarily about sales. They are more about an entrepreneurial mindset. So for any of you who are, starting off on your journey, I think this is good advice for any entrepreneur, whether you class yourself as a salesperson, or not, because the reality is that you will be the face of this product and service, and you will be the person that is having the most conversations with customers. So, however you look at sales, and I know, lots of people have a very negative view. It's just that hasn't been my experience. My experience of sales is very much that, if sales are struggling, then you really do need to look at wider what is happening in the organization in terms of how you're setting up your 4 Ps. But ultimately, if you are brought in as a salesperson or you are leading, you are an entrepreneur leading an organization, you are responsible for, putting numbers on the wall, because otherwise you can't employ people. So, the buck does stop with you. You can't outsource the responsibility for sales if you are the lead person in that organization. Yes, Sam, I would love to hear from you, having a lifetime of sales yourself. Any words of wisdom do you have? Fantastic.
Yeah, just kind of echoing that point. Effectively, you need to remember all the time is that the fundamental, because people go, well, look, I'm building it. My job is really important. I'm making it. I'm doing this. My job is this. But the fundamental purpose of the business is not to make things, and it's not to do services. It is to sell things.
Yeah.
You do something, you sell it. So if the business can't sell, it's not a business. So it doesn't matter how good your product or service is. If you can't sell it, you don't have a business. And the number of businesses and people I talk to go, yeah, I'm not really interested in sales because it just kind of happens. Effectively, you might as well say, I'm not really interested in actually having a business. And if you have, and the other thing is also to look at if you have any contact outside the business with anyone, you do have some form of sales function. So if you're an engineer talking to another company, etc., you are representing the company. So you should be able to have some form of sales knowledge in order to try to assist the salespeople. Because loads of people go, well, I'm not in sales, so it doesn't matter. But actually you are, because if you are externally facing in any way, you are in sales by default, because the purpose of the business is to sell.
Yeah. And I can't think of a better note on which to end this seminar. So tomorrow we are doubling down again on sales before we get to automation. And so, yeah, embrace the day and have some good customer conversations, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.